June 1974. Richard Feynman stands at a podium facing Caltech's graduating class in their caps and gowns. These students have just completed degrees from one of America's most prestigious science institutions. They're expecting the usual commencement speech about reaching for the stars and changing the world. Instead, Feynman tells them that most of what passes for science, including research published in respected journals, taught in university courses, and funded by major institutions, is fundamentally worthless. He calls it cargo cult science, and then he explains why even they, despite years of rigorous training, are probably guilty of practicing it. This comes from Feynman's documented 1974 commencement address at the California Institute of Technology, later published as Cargo Cult Science, and preserved in the Caltech archives. The speech would become one of his most cited warnings about the corruption of scientific thinking. But the story starts much earlier, in the South Pacific during World War II. During the war, Allied forces built airstrips on remote islands across the Pacific. Cargo planes would land, bringing supplies, medicine, food, technology. The indigenous islanders watched these metal birds descend from the sky and unload treasures beyond imagination. They saw the patterns. Soldiers would sit in towers with headphones, speaking into devices. Men with paddles would wave their arms in specific sequences. Runways had to be cleared of debris, and then, reliably, the planes would come. After the war ended, the planes stopped coming. The soldiers left, the supplies disappeared. So the islanders, using pure logic, decided to bring the planes back. They cleared strips of land to create runways. They built control towers from bamboo. They carved headphones from wood and wore them while sitting in the towers. They fashioned antenna shapes from straw. Men stood on the runway waving palm fronds in the same patterns they'd seen the soldiers use. Every element was replicated with stunning attention to detail. The form was perfect. The planes never came. They had everything that looked like an airstrip, everything that appeared to be the conditions for cargo planes to land. But they were missing something fundamental, something invisible. They didn't understand radio waves or flight mechanics or military supply chains. They had copied the form without understanding the substance. To an outside observer, it looked exactly like an airport. To the planes that never came, it was meaningless. Feynman stood at that podium and told those graduating students they were doing the same thing. He wasn't talking about obvious pseudoscience or fringe conspiracy theories. He was talking about published research in academic journals, studies conducted by credentialed scientists at legitimate institutions, work that followed all the apparent rules of scientific methodology, papers that got cited in textbooks, and yet, Feynman argued, most of it shared the same fundamental flaw as those bamboo headphones. It looked like science without being science. Consider one of his examples. For years, researchers studied whether rats could learn to navigate mazes faster with each subsequent attempt. Hundreds of experiments were conducted, papers were published, debates raged in psychology journals. Different research groups claimed different results. Some found dramatic learning effects, others found none. The field churned out study after study, each following proper experimental protocols, each with control groups and statistical analysis. Everything appeared rigorous, but Feynman noticed something. When a researcher finally conducted an experiment accounting for whether the rats could actually hear or smell their way through the maze, not just see the visual cues everyone had been measuring, the learning effects vanished. For decades, researchers had been inadvertently allowing rats to use sensory information no one was controlling for. Every previous experiment, despite following the form of good science, had missed this fundamental variable. The papers weren't fraudulent. The researchers weren't stupid. They had the appearance of scientific rigor, but they lacked what Feynman called scientific integrity. This reveals something crucial about the difference between methodology and integrity. You can follow every rule, cite every source, use every statistical tool correctly, and still produce garbage if you're not honestly trying to disprove yourself. The cargo cult scientist runs the experiment. The real scientist tries to think of every reason the experiment might be fooling them. Feynman gave another example that hit closer to home for physicists. Robert Millikan's famous oil drop experiment measured the charge of an electron, fundamental work that won him the Nobel Prize in 1923. Millikan reported his value with high confidence. His published data showed beautiful consistency. But here's what Feynman discovered when he dug into the history. Millikan's first published value was slightly off. As subsequent physicists tried to replicate his work, they kept getting values slightly different from Millikan's. Each researcher would get a number, compare it to Millikan's prestigious result, assume their own methodology must be flawed, adjust their procedure, and eventually publish a value closer to Millikan's. The next researcher would do the same. For years, the scientific community slowly crept toward the correct value through this chain of partial self-deception. Each physicist thought they were being rigorous. Each followed proper experimental protocols. Each had good reasons to trust Millikan's earlier work. But collectively, they were practicing cargo cult science. They had the form of verification without the substance of genuine independent testing. They were unconsciously tuning their results to match expectations rather than measuring reality cleanly. Feynman emphasized this wasn't about dishonesty. Most cargo cult scientists are sincere. They believe they're doing real science. The problem runs deeper than fraud. It's about a type of self-deception so subtle you don't notice you're doing it. He described it this way. The first principle is that you must not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool. That sentence from the 1974 address cuts to the heart of cargo cult thinking. Your own brain actively works against you seeing your mistakes. You notice evidence that confirms what you believe. You unconsciously discount evidence that contradicts it. You run the experiment until you get the result that seems reasonable, then stop. You interpret ambiguous data in the direction you expect, and every step feels like you're being objective. This wasn't just about scientific research, but about any field where intellectual honesty matters. Cargo cult thinking appears everywhere, in business, in education, in journalism, in policy making, in your own work. Whenever you're going through the motions of rigor without the substance of genuine truth-seeking, you're building a bamboo control tower. Back to that commencement address. Feynman told those graduates about scientific integrity, which he defined as bending over backwards to show how you might be wrong, not just following the rules, not just being thorough, but actively searching for the ways your own conclusion could be mistaken. He said scientists should give all the information that could call their results into question, not hide contrary evidence in footnotes, not emphasize data that supports their hypothesis while downplaying contradictions. Put the ammunition for your critics right in the abstract. He gave a specific instruction. If you're doing an experiment, you should report everything that you think might make it invalid, not only what you think is right about it. Most researchers do the opposite. They report what supports their conclusion and briefly acknowledge limitations only if forced to. They have reasons. They need publications to get tenure. They need funding. They want their ideas to be taken seriously. Every incentive pushes them toward emphasizing confirmatory evidence and minimizing doubt. The system rewards cargo cult science because cargo cult science produces cleaner narratives, more confident conclusions, and easier to publish papers. Real science is messy. It's full of uncertainties and contradictory data and results that don't make sense. Papers that honestly report all that messiness often look weaker than papers that smooth over the complications. So researchers learn to build bamboo control towers, studies that look rigorous but are actually exercises in selective presentation. But then Feynman went further. He told those graduates that they had a responsibility beyond their own research. They needed to refuse to participate in cargo cult science even when everyone around them accepted it, even when it cost them professionally. He said, "You will not only do no particular good, but if you have any reasons for a feeling of pride on the basis of your accomplishment, you will lose it." That's a devastating message for a commencement speech. You spent 4 years earning this degree, and now you're being told that simply following the norms of your field will make your work worthless and drain your accomplishment of meaning. But Feynman wasn't trying to discourage them. He was warning them about the specific trap that catches people who think they're too educated to fall for obvious nonsense. The cargo cult islanders can be forgiven. They had no framework for understanding radio communication or aerodynamics. They were doing their honest best with limited information. But a physicist who cherry-picks data, a researcher who stops investigating once they get the result they wanted, they know better. They have the tools to recognize their own self-deception. They just choose to ignore those tools because building a real control tower is harder than building one from bamboo. Consider how this applies today when you're evaluating expertise. Someone has a degree from a prestigious institution. They've published papers in respected journals. They use sophisticated technical language. They present data in compelling visualizations. They cite sources. Every marker of legitimate expertise is present. But are they practicing cargo cult expertise? Are they selectively presenting evidence that supports their preferred narrative while burying contradictions? Are they mistaking the appearance of rigor for actual rigor? The same principle applies today when you're doing your own knowledge work. You research a topic. You find sources that support your existing belief. You organize them into a coherent argument. You anticipate objections and prepare responses. You present your conclusion with confidence. You've done everything that looks like thorough analysis. But did you genuinely try to prove yourself wrong? Did you seek out the strongest counter-arguments, or just the ones you could easily refute? Did you update your belief when you encountered contradictory evidence, or did you explain away that evidence to preserve your original conclusion? Most people go through life building bamboo control towers without realizing it. They follow career advice that sounds sophisticated, but they never verify whether it actually produces results. They adopt productivity systems that feel rigorous, but never track whether their actual output improves. They learn frameworks and models and methodologies that give them the appearance of expertise without the substance of genuine understanding. They're not being dishonest. They genuinely believe they're being thorough, but they're fooling themselves. Feynman had seen this pattern throughout his career. During the Manhattan Project at Los Alamos, he watched brilliant scientists get so invested in their theoretical models that they ignored experimental data, contradicting their predictions. After the war, he saw academics build entire research programs around fashionable ideas that crumbled when subjected to genuine scrutiny. He noticed how institutions incentivized the appearance of productivity over actual discovery, how funding favored projects that promised clear outcomes over genuine exploration, how peer review rewarded papers that fit expected patterns over papers that challenge assumptions. And he recognized the trap catches everyone eventually, including him. He told a story about his own early research where he'd gotten excited about a result, only to realize later he'd been unconsciously interpreting ambiguous data in the direction he wanted. He hadn't committed fraud, he'd just been human. The experience taught him that intellectual integrity requires constant vigilance against your own motivated reasoning. This brings us to the deepest layer of what Feynman was warning about. Cargo cult science isn't just methodologically flawed research. It's the betrayal of science's fundamental purpose. Science exists to be wrong less often, not to be perfectly right, not to achieve absolute certainty, but to gradually, painfully, honestly reduce the ways we fool ourselves about reality. Every scientific practice, peer review, replication, controlled experiments, statistical analysis, exists as a defense against human self-deception. When you go through the motions of those practices without their spirit, you've kept the shell and killed the organism. You're waving palm fronds on a bamboo runway, wondering why truth won't land. Feynman ended his commencement address with something unexpected. He didn't give those graduates a rousing call to action or an inspirational message about changing the world. He told them they'd probably face a choice at some point in their careers. They could practice cargo cult science, publish regularly, get funding, build a respectable career, gain the respect of peers who are doing the same thing. Or they could practice real science, which might mean publishing less, struggling for funding, being seen as difficult or uncooperative, and possibly never achieving conventional success. He couldn't tell them which to choose. He could only explain what each path meant. 36 years before that speech, in 1938, those Pacific Islanders were still building their bamboo airports. They believed with complete sincerity that they were doing everything necessary to bring back the cargo. They'd be heartbroken to learn they were wasting their effort. But at least they didn't know better. They lacked the framework to understand their mistake. You don't have that excuse. You know the difference between going through the motions and genuinely trying to be less wrong. You know when you're selecting evidence to support your conclusion versus following evidence wherever it leads. You know when you're adopting the appearance of expertise versus building actual competence. You feel the difference, even if you don't admit it. The question Feynman left hanging in that speech hall was simple. Which runway are you building? The one where planes might actually land, even if it takes longer and looks less impressive. Or the bamboo version that photographs well but serves no real purpose except maintaining your illusions. Because here's what he understood that most people miss. The cargo cult version feels like it's working. You're busy. You're productive. You're following best practices. You're accumulating credentials and publications and recognition. The activity itself creates the illusion of progress. The planes never come, but you're so focused on waving the palm fronds that you don't notice. Real science, real expertise, real understanding, it often looks less impressive from the outside. It's slower. It's full of dead ends and mistakes and uncertainty. It requires saying, "I don't know," more often than feels comfortable. It means abandoning ideas you invested years in when the evidence contradicts them. It offers fewer guarantees and more humility. But it's the only kind that works when reality comes to evaluate your conclusions. The only kind that builds something lasting instead of decorative. The only kind that brings actual planes to actual runways instead of maintaining comfortable delusions about bamboo. Feynman gave them one last piece of advice before they walked across that stage to receive their diplomas. I'm talking about a specific extra type of integrity that is not lying, but bending over backwards to show how you're maybe wrong that you ought to have when acting as a scientist. That extra type of integrity. That's the piece missing from the bamboo control tower. That's what separates real understanding from its convincing imitation. And that's what he was challenging them, and challenging you to carry into whatever work matters to you. The planes still aren't coming to those bamboo runways. They never will. But somewhere, someone is building a real airstrip, with all the invisible complexity that requires. Where are you building yours?
You know, people sometimes ask me how I learned to think the way I do. They assume there's some secret, some trick I picked up somewhere, but the truth is, I don't think I'm particularly smart. What I did learn, though, and this took me years to figure out, is that most people don't actually think, they just accept. Let me tell you what I mean by that. When I was a boy, maybe 10 or 11 years old, my father used to take me for walks in the Catskill Mountains. We'd walk through the woods, and he'd point at birds. One day, he pointed at a bird and said, "See that bird? In Italian, it's called a chuto lapitida. In Portuguese, it's bom da peda. In Chinese, it's chung long ta." Then he'd pause and say, "Now, you know in all those languages what that bird is called, but you still don't know anything about the bird. You only know what people call it in different places. Now, that bird, if you watch it, you'll notice it's always pecking at its feathers. Why? Because there are lice that eat the protein in the feathers, and the bird has to clean them off. The lice eat the protein. They lay eggs. More lice come. The bird spends half its time just staying clean. That lesson stuck with me my whole life. Knowing the name of something is not the same as knowing something. And most of what we call education is really just learning names, learning labels. But thinking, real thinking, means asking what's actually happening. I noticed this later when I was at MIT and Princeton, sitting in advanced physics classes with some of the smartest students in the country. We'd be learning about, say, quantum mechanics or electromagnetic theory. The professor would write equations on the board, beautiful equations, and everyone would copy them down carefully into their notebooks. Then, at the end of class, someone would raise their hand and ask, "Professor, what does this equation mean?" And the professor would explain it again using different symbols, different mathematical language. And the student would nod, satisfied. But I'd sit there thinking, wait, what does it mean? Not what does the equation say? What's actually happening in the real world that this equation describes? See, there's a difference between knowing something and understanding something, and most people, even very educated people, confuse the two. They think because they can repeat what they've been told, because they can pass a test, because they know the technical terms, that they understand, but they don't. I'll give you an example. After the war, I worked on the atomic bomb project at Los Alamos. I went to Brazil to teach physics at the university in Rio. Wonderful place, beautiful students, very serious about their education. But I noticed something strange. These students could recite entire textbooks. They'd memorized everything. But when I'd ask them a simple question like, "What happens if I shine light through a Polaroid filter at a certain angle?" they couldn't answer. They'd never thought about it. They only knew what the book said would happen, not why it happened or what it meant. I started asking them questions differently. I'd say, "Forget the textbook. You're walking on the beach, and the sun is reflecting off the water. Why is that reflection brighter from certain angles?" They couldn't answer. They didn't have the habit of thinking about the world around them. They had the habit of memorizing what they were told. That's when I realized something important. Thinking isn't a talent you're born with. It's a habit you build, and most people never build that habit because nobody teaches them how. So how do you build it? How do you train your brain to actually think instead of just accept? The first thing I learned to do, and I did this naturally as a kid, without realizing it was special, was to always translate what I was learning into something I could see or touch or imagine. When someone told me about atoms, I didn't just memorize, "Atoms are small particles that make up matter." I'd picture them. I'd imagine them bouncing around, colliding with each other. I'd ask myself, if I had tiny eyes and could watch atoms, what would I see? Later, when I was studying physics at MIT, I did the same thing with equations. People thought I was slow, because while they were racing through problem sets, I'd sit there, sometimes for hours, just staring at an equation. But I wasn't being slow. I was translating. I was asking myself, what is this equation actually describing? If I could watch this happen in real life, what would I see? Sometimes I'd even invent strange little scenarios. Like when I was learning about electromagnetic fields, I imagined I was the size of an electron, floating in space. What would I feel? If another charge came near me, how would I know? What would push or pull on me? This sounds childish maybe, but it worked, because once I could see it in my head, I understood it. And once I understood it, I never forgot it. Here's the thing nobody tells you. You can't think clearly about something you can't visualize. And most people skip that step. They learn the abstraction first, the formula, the technical term, the theory, and they never bother to connect it to anything real. So it just floats in their head, disconnected, meaningless. And then they wonder why they forget everything a week after the exam. The second thing I learned, and this took me longer, was to always ask, why? Not just once, but over and over, like a child. Children are actually brilliant at this. They'll ask you why the sky is blue, and you'll say, because of the way light scatters in the atmosphere. And they'll say, why does light scatter? And you'll say, because air molecules are small and interact with light waves. And they'll say, why do they interact? And they keep going until you finally admit you don't actually know. We lose that somewhere. We get embarrassed to ask basic questions. We don't want to look stupid. So we just nod and pretend we understand. But that's a disaster. Because if you don't understand the foundation, everything built on top of it is shaky. I remember once, I was teaching at Caltech, and a student came to me confused about quantum mechanics. He said, "I don't understand the uncertainty principle." And I said, "Okay, explain to me what you think it means." And he started reciting the textbook definition, something about position and momentum and Planck's constant. And I stopped him and said, No, don't tell me what the book says. Tell me what you think is happening." And he couldn't. He literally couldn't tell me because he'd never thought about it. He just memorized it. So we sat down, and I said, let's start simple. Forget quantum mechanics for a second. If you wanted to measure where something is like a ball, what would you have to do? And he said, look at it. And I said, right. And how do you look at something? And we went through it. Light bounces off the ball, enters your eye. You see where it is. And I said, now, what if the ball is really, really small, so small that the light you use to look at it actually pushes it when it bounces off? And you could see his face change. He got it. Not because I gave him a better definition, but because he finally thought about what was actually happening. This is the secret. If there is one, don't accept anything until you can explain it to yourself in your own words, using your own pictures, your own analogies. If you can't do that, you don't understand it yet. And that's okay, but don't pretend you do. The third thing, and this is maybe the most important, is that I learned not to be afraid of not knowing. This sounds simple, but it's not. Most people are terrified of admitting they don't understand something. They think it makes them look dumb, so they fake it. They nod along. They use the right words even though they don't really know what those words mean. But here's what I figured out. The smartest thing you can do is admit when you don't know something. Because once you admit it, you can start actually learning it. But if you pretend you already know it, you're stuck. You stop asking questions. You stop thinking. I used to sit in seminars at Princeton and Caltech where some famous physicist would give a talk really technical, really advanced, and everyone would sit there nodding like they understood every word. And maybe some of them did. But I didn't always understand. So I'd raise my hand and ask a basic question. And sometimes people would look at me like I was simple. But you know what? Half the time, after I asked, 3 other people would come up to me afterward and say, "Thank God you asked that. I didn't understand either." The truth is, a lot of what passes for expertise is just people pretending. They've learned the language. They know which words to use. But they don't actually understand what they're talking about. And you can tell if you listen carefully, because when you ask them to explain it simply, they can't. They retreat into jargon. They make it sound complicated because they themselves are confused. So I made a rule for myself. If I can't explain something to a freshman, or to a child, or to someone with no background in the subject, then I don't really understand it myself. And that's okay. That just means I need to think about it more. There's one more thing, and this might sound strange, but it's been useful for me. I learned to enjoy not knowing, to actually find it exciting when I encounter something I don't understand, because that means there's something new to figure out, something new to play with. When I was at Los Alamos during the war, we were all working incredibly hard, long hours, high pressure. We were building a bomb, after all, and I was getting burned out. I felt like physics had become this heavy, serious thing, just equations and problems and pressure. So afterward, when I went back to Cornell, I decided I was just going to play. I wasn't going to worry about doing important work or publishing important papers. I was just going to think about whatever seemed interesting. And one day, I was in the cafeteria, and some kid threw a plate in the air. And I noticed the plate was wobbling as it spun. And there was a blue medallion on the plate, Cornell's logo, and I noticed that the medallion was rotating faster than the plate was wobbling. And I thought, I wonder why. So I went back to my office, and just for fun, I worked out the equations. Why does the plate wobble that way? What's the relationship between the wobble and the spin? And it turned out to be connected to some deep principles of rotation and angular momentum. And that little problem, that silly thing I did just because it seemed fun, eventually led to work that contributed to my Nobel Prize years later. But I didn't know that at the time. I wasn't trying to do important work. I was just playing. I was just curious. And I think that's maybe the real secret, if I'm being honest. You don't force your brain to think like a genius. You just let yourself be curious like a child. You ask questions. You try to see what's really happening instead of just accepting what you're told. You admit when you don't understand something, and you keep thinking about it until you do. Most people stop themselves before they even start. They think, "Oh, that's too complicated for me," or "I'm not smart enough to understand that," or "I'll just trust the experts." But understanding isn't about being smart. It's about being persistent. It's about caring enough to actually think about something instead of just accepting it. I've spent my whole life around the smartest people in the world. Nobel Prize winners, brilliant mathematicians, incredible physicists. And you know what? Some of them were genuinely brilliant. But most of them were just people who never stopped asking questions, who never accepted something just because everyone else did, who kept thinking about problems even when everyone else had moved on. You can do that. Anyone can do that. You don't need to be special. You just need to care enough to try. So next time someone tells you something, anything, doesn't matter what, don't just accept it. Ask yourself, what does that actually mean? Can I picture it? Can I explain it to someone else in my own words? If not, then I don't really understand it yet. And that's okay. That's just where the thinking begins.
Action cures fear. If you wait to feel like it before you act, you're only strengthening procrastination. And the difference between those who achieve and those who stay stuck in the same place is this. acting at the exact moment the mind tries to delay. Now pay very close attention because I'm about to reveal something few people ever tell you about procrastination. You may never have realized this. Procrastination isn't rest. It's the hidden source of your stress. You think you're easing the pressure when you postpone a task, but the opposite happens. Every minute that passes without doing what needs to be done, your mind keeps working in silence, like an alarm that never shuts off. That's why even without taking action, you feel drained, heavy, and anxious. The body rests, but the mind doesn't. And let me tell you something most people don't know. Putting off work, delaying a commitment, is actually more exhausting than doing it, because the weight of postponing is heavier than the effort of completing. When you decide to delay, your mind doesn't forget. It keeps reminding you over and over. When you try to relax, the thought pops up. When you try to sleep, your brain whispers, "You still haven't done it." It's like carrying a debt that never stops charging interest. But when you finally face the task and get it done, something powerful happens inside you. The weight lifts, your body relaxes, and your mind finds peace. It's as if the energy once drained by guilt is suddenly freed up to create, to dream, and to achieve more. Great achievers understood this in practice. Acting is easier than delaying. That's the real secret. The effort of doing is limited, but the reward is incredible. The effort of carrying the mental weight of not doing is endless.
And here lies the first key. Every time you catch yourself stalling, remember you're choosing the harder path. It looks like comfort, but it's suffering in disguise. True freedom begins when you choose to act, not because you're inspired, but because you've understood that action is the only way to reclaim the energy procrastination steals from you. So now the question is, are you going to keep hiding behind excuses? Or are you going to use this moment to flip the switch once and for all? If you're willing, stay with me until the end of this talk. I ask you for just 10 minutes. 10 minutes that could unlock your life and free you from the weight of procrastination forever. Believe me, very few lessons like the one you'll hear today are ever shared. Pay close attention now, because what I'm about to reveal is the first weapon to crush procrastination once and for all. Here's one of the secrets. Start before you're ready. The biggest mistake people make is believing they must wait for the perfect moment, the perfect motivation, the perfect energy to act. But that moment never comes. And the longer you wait, the further action slips away. The secret is to flip the logic. It's not motivation that creates action. It's action that creates motivation. And here's something that may change the way you think about action. A person with little knowledge but who decides to take a step forward is already miles ahead of someone with all the knowledge in the world who refuses to move. Those who know little but take action achieve more than those who know much yet remain still. Because it's not the size of what you know that defines your future. It's the size of the step you take. Stagnant knowledge is like still water. It evaporates with time. But action, even when imperfect, is like a flowing river. It carves a path, learns along the way, and grows stronger with every mile it moves forward. So here's an exercise that can transform your life. Whenever you feel that urge to delay, commit to just 2 minutes of the task. Just 2 minutes. Pick up the notebook and write the first line. Open your computer and organize the first file. It doesn't matter what the task is. Break the resistance with the smallest possible action. And something almost magical happens. Once you begin, even for 2 minutes, the energy shifts. The mind that resisted starts to cooperate. The body that felt heavy finds rhythm. And here is the second key. The power of simply beginning, even without knowing everything. Great achievers aren't different from you. They only learned this one secret. Never wait to be ready. That's the greatest secret. They understand that perfection comes along the way, not at the beginning. And if you apply this, you'll realize that the act of starting is already half the victory. So, when procrastination tries to trap you again, remember, don't fight it by waiting for strength. Beat it by taking a step. Start small, but start now. Pay close attention now. Destroying procrastination is not a single act. It's a way of life. It's no use starting today only to fall into the same traps tomorrow. You need to build within yourself a system so simple and so strong that procrastination finds no space to grow. The secret is in turning small victories into daily discipline. Every time you act, no matter how small the action, you're training your mind to obey action instead of doubt. You begin to create a pattern. That pattern becomes character, and character shapes destiny. This is how great minds, scientists, inventors, and achievers went so far, not because they were perfect, but because they chose to act every single day. Procrastination isn't only about what you fail to do, but about the pattern you reinforce each day. Every time you delay, you're training your brain to delay again. But every time you act, even in something small, you're training your mind to act again. This is how habits are born, through small, invisible repetitions that, when added together, create an unbreakable force. Imagine this: a person who writes just 1 page a day. It seems small, almost nothing, but in a year they have 365 pages, a full book. Meanwhile, someone with big ideas plans to write 365 pages in a single week, but without discipline ends the year with nothing but blank pages. And here's the key: it is always habit that wins over talent. You don't need to change your entire life today. You only need to start small, but repeat it every single day.
Read for 5 minutes. Exercise for 5 minutes. What matters is not the size of the step, but the consistency with which you take it. So engrave this in your mind. Don't wait for perfect conditions, and whenever you begin small. Because today's discipline, no matter how small it seems, will become tomorrow's enormous legacy. Now pay very close attention, because we've reached the most important part. It's not enough to just start building good habits if you keep feeding the bad ones. It's like trying to fill a leaky bucket. No matter how much water you pour in, it all drains out through the holes. Procrastination, addictions, constant distractions. These are the holes that drain your energy, your discipline, and your life. Have you ever wondered why everything that feels like sin also feels so good? It's because almost everything that feels good pulls you into the pit. Everything that gives you immediate pleasure without discipline comes with a heavy price. The world offers sweet shortcuts that in the end lead straight into a hole. Overeating, drinking without control, the comfort of laziness, endless distractions. All of these seem to ease the moment, but they are quietly stealing your life. The drink that corrodes your health, the screen that robs your days. Immediate pleasure almost always hides a long-term prison. And here's the truth most people don't want to hear. If something gives you pleasure but weakens you, it isn't pleasure, it's poison. It's like a fire that warms you for an instant but then burns everything around you. The problem isn't pleasure itself, but being enslaved to it. When you live chasing what feels good and easy, you lose the strength to build what is great and lasting. Addictions always sell the illusion of freedom, but they always deliver chains. You think you're choosing, but in reality you're being chosen, dominated, controlled. And there's only one way to break free. Decide that no momentary pleasure will ever be greater than the extraordinary life you were meant to live. Discipline may taste bitter at first, but it's discipline that brings true pleasure. The pleasure of achieving, of feeling proud,
of looking in the mirror and seeing someone free. Because the pleasure of sin lasts for a moment, but its weight can last for years. So next time temptation comes, remember, what feels good now may be the very thing digging your grave. But if you have the courage to say no to the immediate, you are saying yes to the future you've always dreamed of. And here's the key. The human brain is always searching for reward. If you only feed it cheap, easy rewards, it gets used to crumbs. But if you train your mind to wait for and pursue greater rewards, you teach your soul to choose greatness over mediocrity. Trading immediate pleasure for the satisfaction of achievement is an act of maturity. It's deciding that your life is worth more than a few seconds of relief. It's understanding that true pleasure isn't found in what you consume, but in what you build. And here's the decision you need to make. The next time temptation comes, ask yourself, do I want 5 minutes of pleasure or a lifetime of pride? The answer to that question defines your destiny. So start before you're ready. Take the first step, even if it's small. Replace immediate pleasure with the satisfaction of achievement. Feed good habits every day and cut out the ones that drag you down. And now the greatest secret of all. Without it, nothing is possible. Understand that you will make mistakes. You will fall, you will fail, you will procrastinate at times, and that's okay. To err is human. What separates failures from the successful is not the absence of mistakes, but the ability to rise and keep going.
Persistence through habit. True power doesn't come from always getting it right, but from getting it wrong less and less. Success is born out of disciplined repetition, not perfection. The great achievers all made mistakes, stumbled, failed, but they never stopped. And that is exactly what you must do. Fall, learn, and continue. Because the only true defeat is giving up. So take this as a life decree. It's not about never failing. It's about never stopping. Those who persist win. Those who insist win. And those who decide to continue even after the fall find in habit the key to ending procrastination. And now I want you to do something simple yet powerful. Declare your decision for change. Comment below, I decide to overcome procrastination. Let this sentence be your mark that from today on, you are no longer a prisoner of inertia. And don't forget to leave a like if this video has helped you. It's very important for us. Subscribe to the channel now and turn on notifications. Thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next video.
Not with this talk. I'm here. I'm doing it. But somewhere in my life right now, there's something I should be doing that I'm not doing. Maybe it's a project I've been putting off for weeks. Maybe it's a conversation I need to have. Maybe it's learning something I've been saying I'll learn when I have time. Stand up. And you know what? You are too. Right now, in this moment, there's something you know you should be doing. Something important. Something meaningful. Something that would move your life forward. And you're not doing it. Direct address aims, we're all the same. Every single person in this room, we know what we should be doing. We have goals. We have dreams. We have projects. We have ideas. And we don't start. We wait. We prepare. We plan. We research. We wait for the right time, the right mood, the right circumstances, the right feeling of inspiration. And while we wait, life passes, opportunities disappear, dreams fade. And we wonder why we never accomplish what we're capable of. Seek pause, shift ton, but Richard Feynman, he didn't have this problem. Not because he was more motivated, not because he had more willpower, not because he was naturally disciplined. He had a method, a specific technique he used to force himself to start. Every single time, no matter how he felt, no matter how difficult the task, no matter how much resistance he faced. And today I'm going to show you that exact method, not a motivational speech, not a pep talk, a concrete, practical technique that Feynman used thousands of times. The same technique that led to a Nobel Prize, revolutionary discoveries, decades of productive work, lean-ins, and here's what's powerful about this: it works in the next 5 minutes, not someday, not after you build a habit. Right now, you can use this technique to start the thing you've been avoiding. Let me show you how. Walk across stage. But first, let me tell you the story that reveals everything about Feynman's starting method, because this story changed how I think about procrastination forever. It's 1965. Feynman has just won the Nobel Prize, huge honor, peak of his career. And you'd think he'd be ecstatic, right? He's depressed. Yeah, let that shock land us seriously. Nobel Prize winner depressed. Why? Because he's stuck. He can't start anything. He sits at his desk. He looks at physics problems, and he feels nothing. No motivation, no excitement, no drive. The work that used to consume him, that used to make him lose track of time, now feels like drudgery. He knows he should be working. He knows he's capable, but he can't make himself start. Oh, slow down or sound familiar. This is the thing nobody tells you about successful people. They struggle with starting too. The difference isn't that they never feel resistance. The difference is they have methods for overcoming it. So what did Feynman do? Sever share this carefully. He went to the Caltech cafeteria just to get out of his office. And he's sitting there eating lunch, watching students. And a student throws a plate in the air. The plate wobbles as it spins, and Feynman notices something. The wobble and the spin have a relationship. And he thinks, I wonder what that relationship is. Not, I should figure that out. Not, I need to work on that. Just, I wonder. The conjecture, and that wondering, that tiny spark of genuine curiosity, that's enough. He goes back to his office, and he starts working on it. Not because he has to, not because it's important, because he's curious. He works out the physics of the wobbling plate, just for fun, just because it's interesting. And from that, from following his curiosity about something pointless, comes his most important work on quantum electrodynamics, the work that actually wins him the Nobel Prize. Make the point this is Feynman's secret for starting, and it's completely different from what anyone else teaches. Everyone else says, think about why it's important, visualize the outcome. Remember your goals, use discipline, use willpower, force yourself. Feynman said find what's interesting about it, follow your curiosity, start with play. That's a hotter, direct statement. That's the method, that's how he forced himself to start every single time. Not by forcing, by following curiosity. And I know that sounds too simple, too easy, like it couldn't possibly work on hard things, on things you don't find interesting, on actual work, but it does. And I'm going to prove it to you by breaking down exactly how this works and how you can use it today. Let me start with the most important insight, the thing Feynman understood that most people miss. Get philosophical. Starting is not about motivation. Starting is about attention. Think about it. When do you naturally start things without resistance? When something captures your attention. When something makes you curious. When something interests you. You don't need discipline to watch a show you're hooked on. You don't need willpower to talk about something that fascinates you. You don't need motivation to explore something that makes you curious. Make the contrasty. But when something doesn't capture your attention, when it feels like obligation instead of interest, that's when you need massive discipline, massive willpower, massive motivation. And those resources are limited. They run out. That's why forcing yourself to start through sheer willpower doesn't work long term. High point, but attention. Attention is unlimited. When something genuinely interests you, you can pay attention to it for hours, days, weeks, without exhaustion. That's what Feynman figured out. The secret to starting isn't finding more willpower. It's finding the interesting angle, the curious question, the playful approach. Find that, and starting becomes effortless. Tell this story. Let me show you what this looked like in practice. Concrete example. Feynman needs to write a paper. A formal, technical physics paper. The kind of thing that's tedious to write. Lots of equations. Careful proofs. Precise language. Most physicists would approach this with dread. I have to write this paper. It's going to take forever. Let me clear my schedule. Let me force myself to sit down and grind through it. Feynman doesn't do that. Instead, he asks himself, what's the most interesting part of this? What's the one thing I'm excited to explain? I could continue. Maybe it's a clever insight. Maybe it's an unexpected connection. Maybe it's a simple way to understand something complex. He finds that interesting part, and he starts there, not with the introduction, not with the abstract, with the part that makes him curious. And once he's engaged, once his attention is captured, the rest follows. He writes the interesting part, then the part that connects to it, then the next part. Paspasis, the paper gets written, but not through force, through following his interest from one part to the next. To make it practical, this is the technique. This is how you use curiosity to start. Step 1, don't think about the whole task. That's overwhelming. That triggers resistance. Step 2, ask yourself, what's the most interesting part of this? What's the one piece I'm curious about? Step 3, start there. Just that one interesting piece, nothing else. Give yourself permission to ignore everything else. Explain why this works. Here's what happens once you start the interesting part. You build momentum. Your brain engages, your attention focuses, and suddenly the other parts don't seem as hard. But if you try to start with the hard parts, the boring parts, the parts that don't interest you, you never build momentum. You're fighting resistance the entire time. Give another example. Let's say you need to write a report. Boring. Tedious. You've been putting it off for days. Don't think about the whole report. Don't force yourself to start at the beginning. Ask, what's the most interesting data point in this report? What's the one finding I think is cool? Start by writing about that. Just that one thing. 2 paragraphs. That's it. I'm snap. You're not procrastinating anymore. You've started. And once you've written those 2 paragraphs, the next part is easier. And the next part is easier. And before you know it, the report is done. Not through force, through following interest. Share personal example. Let me tell you about when I discovered this technique. When it clicked for me. I had this huge project I'd been avoiding for months. Every time I thought about it, I felt overwhelmed. It was too big, too complex, too many moving parts. And I kept trying to force myself to start. Just sit down and do it. Stop being lazy. Use discipline. It never worked. I'd sit down, stare at my screen, and find a million other things to do. It continues. Then I learned about Feynman's method, and I tried it. I asked, what's the most interesting part of this project? If I could work on just one piece, what would be fun? And there was something. One small part that I thought was kind of cool. A design challenge, a creative problem. So I started there. Just that one piece. Gave myself permission to ignore everything else. Build this, and you know what? I got absorbed. I worked on it for 2 hours. Didn't feel like work. Felt like play. And the next day I thought, what's the next interesting part? And I found something. And I worked on that, and piece by piece, following interest from one part to the next, the entire project got done. Not through discipline, through curiosity. Make the point. That's when I realized procrastination isn't laziness. It's not lack of discipline. It's lack of engagement. When something genuinely engages your attention, you don't procrastinate. You just do it. The problem is we try to force ourselves to start things that don't engage us. And force doesn't work, at least not sustainably. But finding the engaging angle, that works every time. Address the obvious objection. Now, I know what you're thinking. That's great for interesting projects. But what about truly boring things? Things that have no interesting angle. Things I just have to do. A fair question. Let me show you how Feynman handled truly boring tasks. Tell this story. Feynman has to attend committee meetings, university bureaucracy, budget discussions, policy decisions, the most boring, tedious, pointless feeling meetings you can imagine. He hates them. Everyone hates them. Most professors just suffer through, counting the minutes until they can leave. Feynman does something different. He plays a game with himself. Our founder explained, he asks, can I predict what people will say before they say it? Can I figure out the hidden agendas? Can I understand the group dynamics? He turns the boring meeting into a psychology experiment. He's not enduring it. He's studying it. He's curious about it. Is this artificially creating interest? Yes, absolutely. But who cares it works? He's engaged. He's paying attention. The meeting isn't torture anymore. It's interesting. 8, make it actionable. This is the advanced technique. When something truly has no inherent interest, you create interest. You turn it into a game. You set a challenge. You find a puzzle to solve. Boring paperwork. Can you do it in half the usual time? Can you find a way to systematize it so you never have to think about it again? Tedious data entry. Can you find patterns? Can you predict what comes next? Can you figure out why the system is designed this way? You're not changing the task. You're changing your relationship to it. You're finding a way to engage your curiosity, even artificially. And once curiosity is engaged, starting becomes easy. Tell another Feynman story. Here's another example of this technique in action, and this one is brilliant. Feynman needs to learn biology, not his field. He's a physicist, but he's curious about how life works at the molecular level. So he starts attending biology lectures. And at first, it's interesting. Everything's new, everything's exciting, but then it gets tedious. There's a lot of memorization, a lot of terminology, a lot of catalog knowledge. The kind of stuff that's boring to learn. Share what he does. Most people would force themselves through this. I have to memorize these terms. I have to power through. Let me make flashcards. Feynman asks, what's the underlying logic here? Why are these proteins shaped this way? What would happen if they were shaped differently? He turns memorization into problem solving. He's not just learning facts. He's figuring out systems. He's understanding principles. Make the connection, and that's inherently more interesting. Problem solving engages your brain in a way memorization doesn't. So even when the material itself is tedious, he finds a way to make his engagement with it interesting. Hypose, that's the key insight. You can always find an interesting angle. Always. Even on the most boring tasks. Even on the most tedious material. It might not be the obvious angle. It might not be the standard approach. But there's always something that can capture your curiosity. Roger, get practical. Let me give you a framework. A concrete process you can use right now to find the interesting angle on anything. When you're stuck, when you can't make yourself start, when you're procrastinating, use these 5 questions to present these clearly. Question 1. What about this would a 10-year-old find interesting? Kids are naturally curious. They find interest in things adults think are boring. Channel that perspective. What would make a kid go cool? Question 2. What's the puzzle here? What's the thing I could figure out? Our brains love puzzles. They love problems to solve. Even in boring tasks, there's usually a puzzle. Find it. Sarah, continue. Question 3. What could I learn from this that would be useful elsewhere? If the task itself isn't interesting, maybe the skills or knowledge you gain from it are. Find that angle. Question 4. How could I do this in a way nobody else has tried? Novelty is inherently interesting. Can you approach this task differently? Can you find a unique angle? Question 5. What would make this playful instead of work? How could you turn this into a game, a challenge, an experiment? What would make it fun? Pause. One of those 5 questions will give you an angle, an entry point, a way to engage your curiosity. And once curiosity is engaged, starting becomes automatic. Share a powerful example. Let me show you how powerful this is with a specific example. You need to clean your house. Boring. Tedious? You've been putting it off. You try to force yourself. Doesn't work. Use the questions. What would a 10-year-old find interesting? Maybe the satisfaction of making things perfect. The transformation. What's the puzzle? Maybe figuring out the most efficient order to clean things. The optimal path through the house. What could I learn? Maybe time management. Maybe systems thinking. Maybe just what state I let things get to before I finally clean. Continue. How could I do this differently? Maybe I clean to music and try to dance while cleaning. Maybe I pretend I'm a professional cleaner and time myself. Maybe I take before and after photos. What would make it playful? Maybe I set a timer and race it. Maybe I make it a game to throw things away. Maybe I treat it like a meditation. Point of C. 5 angles. At least one of them makes cleaning slightly more interesting than it was before. And that's enough. That's all you need to start. Get serious now. Here's what's crucial to understand. This technique isn't about tricking yourself. It's not about pretending boring things are interesting. It's about recognizing that interest is a choice. Attention is a choice. Laffer explained this carefully. You can choose what you pay attention to about any task. You can focus on how tedious it is, how much you don't want to do it, how boring it feels. That's one choice. Or you can focus on finding the one interesting angle, the one engaging element, the one curious question. That's another choice. Make the point. Most people don't realize they have this choice. They think interest just happens to them. Either something is interesting or it's not. Feynman understood you can cultivate interest. You can direct your curiosity. You can choose what engages you. And that choice is the difference between effortless starting and constant procrastination. Tell one more story. Let me give you one final Feynman example. This one shows the technique at its purest. Feynman is asked to serve on a committee investigating science education, specifically evaluating textbooks. Boring, tedious. Most professors would decline or suffer through it. Feynman sees an interesting angle. He asks, how bad are these textbooks really? Can I find the worst example of teaching without understanding? Build this on. Now it's not a boring obligation. It's a challenge, a treasure hunt. He's looking for the worst textbook, the most egregious example of empty jargon, and he finds it. Books that use scientific terms without explaining concepts. That makes students feel like they understand when they don't. He's engaged. He's curious. He writes scathing reviews. Not because he has to, because he's genuinely interested in exposing bad education. Pause the same task, different angle. One approach is torture, the other is engaging. The task didn't change. His relationship to it did. I can walk to center stage. So let me bring this all together. Let me give you the complete method. Feynman's technique for forcing himself to start every single time. Present this as a complete system. When you're stuck, when you're procrastinating, when you can't make yourself start. Here's what you do first. Stop trying to force yourself. Stop using discipline and willpower and guilt. Those don't work. They just make you feel worse. Second, ask yourself, what's the most interesting part of this task? What's the one piece I'm curious about? Third, if nothing seems interesting, use the 5 questions. Find an angle that engages you. Create interest if you have to. Pray, continue. Fourth, give yourself permission to start with just that interesting part. Nothing else. You don't have to do the whole thing. Just the one engaging piece. Fifth, start. Just start. On that one piece, for 5 minutes, that's at 6. Notice what happens. Once you start, momentum builds. Your brain engages. The next piece becomes easier. A pause, that's the method. That's how Feynman did it. Thousands of times, over decades. Not through superhuman discipline. Through understanding how attention works. Through following curiosity instead of forcing compliance. If I get personal, I use this technique every single day now. Every time I catch myself procrastinating, I ask, what's interesting about this? What angle could engage me? And every time I find something, every time it makes starting easier. I share results. I've written more, accomplished more, learned more. Not because I became more disciplined, but because I stopped trying to force myself and started following my curiosity or star-pointed audience. And you can do this too? Right now. Think about that thing you've been procrastinating on. That thing you thought about when I mentioned procrastination at the start of this talk. You know what it is. It's sitting there in your mind. That project, that conversation, that task. How's that direct challenge edge? Ask yourself right now, what's the most interesting part of it? What's the one piece that makes you even slightly curious? Got it. Good. That's where you start. Not with the whole thing, not with the hard parts, not with the beginning, with that one interesting piece. Today, in the next hour, 5 minutes, that's all. Egg pauses and watch what happens. Watch how different it feels to start from curiosity instead of obligation. Watch how momentum builds. Watch how the rest becomes easier. A fast build to conclusion. This is what Feynman taught us. Not just about physics, about life, about getting things done, about being productive. Success isn't about discipline, it's about engagement. It's about finding what's interesting and following it. It's about turning work into play, obligation into curiosity. Slow down, and when you do that, when you stop forcing and start following, everything changes. Starting isn't hard anymore. It's natural. It's automatic. It's even enjoyable. You're not pushing yourself. You're pulled by your interest. You're drawn by your curiosity. You're engaged by what you find fascinating. Final point. That's how Feynman forced himself to start. Every single time. Not by forcing at all. By finding what was interesting and following it. And that's how you can start too. Not someday. Not when you feel more motivated right now. Today. This afternoon. Find the interesting angle. Start there. Follow your curiosity. Pause. Smile us. It's that simple. It's that powerful. It's that transformative. Thank you. First, if you want more techniques from Feynman, more insights into how one of history's most productive minds actually worked, do me a favor. Like this video and subscribe to the Mind of Richard Feynman channel. We're uncovering the real methods behind Feynman's genius. Not motivation, not discipline. Actual techniques you can use. Join us. Let's start together. See you in the next one.